The DIESOL podcast,
Developing innovation in English as a second or other language.
episode 73, accessibility in Tesol.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 73. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm Ixchell Reyes. Hello, November.
Hey, we're
end of the year.
It's starting to get cold too.
Are
you cold?
It is.
Or is it cold in Texas?
Well, it's chilly and windy, and by chilly I mean it's a frosty 70 degrees.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, we can't really complain about cold in Southern California either, but it's a bit colder than that.
But hey, next Saturday, it's projected to be 58. So
while our listeners in Minnesota are just like,
or Canada,
they're just throwing the screens like
snow. They already have snow in Canada.
Shut up, Michelle. You don't know what you're talking about.
That's not winter.
So yeah, here we are. Everything going okay?
Yeah, I was recently at TEDx.
Oh yeah, how'd that go?
Yeah, the topic was resiliency, so it's very useful. I got a lot out of it.
Cool.
How about you? You survived the serial killer.
So the fall Q greeting was, I mean, it's not a beautiful city to be sure up in Stockton, but I did survive. And the school where it was at, the San Joaquin Teachers College up there, was gorgeous. What a gorgeous building! So beautifully laid out. So I'm all inspired. I'm trying to steal their designs and we're doing building designs on our campus for upcoming projects. It's like 8 years away, but I'm trying to influence some of those conversations around like pedagogical building and those types of things as well. So yeah, we had a fun time. I went through with Ryan and Brian from Check This Out. We went through a haunted car wash for Halloween stuff.
I heard about those. A couple of friends were telling me so you got your car wash and you got your scare in.
And got scares in. They're like pulling open the door. One of them jumped in the car with us, and like it was pretty good. But and then you get a free car wash out of it at the end, and some of the money went to charity too. So it was
that's cool.
Yeah, so it was nice little thing. But anyways, yeah. So here we are in November, and Ixchell, you brought up today's topic. So let's jump over and get into things. You want me to say jump into it?
All right. Today we're talking about accessibility. The topic really stemmed from a student I had when I first started teaching, and she had a vision problem. So we had to make the test. We had to enlarge the text for her when it came to tests. So the definition from North Carolina State University says, accessible means a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and equally integrated manner, with substantially equivalent ease of use. The person with a disability must be able to obtain the information as fully, equally, and independently as a person without a disability. Mm-hmm. And this is it. This is exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah. So I had a student that was similar to yours, Ixchell, with the, she really needed massive zooming in on the screen. So like we were in a computer lab, and it was like, it was almost like, to me, I was like, whoa, like I hadn't ever considered that much need, because she was on a 15-inch monitor, and she was, she got our accessibility specialist to come in and help us and everything. But she was zoomed in where it was like 3 words across an entire 15-inch screen. Like it was just full massive zoom. And she was still like putting her face up to the screen pretty close to be able to see it all. So she had some pretty serious vision issues, like just barely being able to get through it all. And so that was one of the first times that I had like at least an awareness that like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here, and absolutely how we need to help this person. I wanted to point out a few things around accessibility, just kind of the conversations that we have, because I think, especially in TESOL, this is, once again, late to the party and late to the conversation, but, our field in general has not mentioned it very much, but I think a lot of, and this includes me too, so I'm not singling anybody out, but there are frustrations with accessibility because of the work that goes into making sure documents and online resources and whatever else it is accessible, does seem like a barrier to entry to a lot of teachers. And what I mean by that is like, okay, I'm going to go do a bunch of work. I'm going to make sure that all of these images are alt tagged and whatever else it is. And then, and then maybe people will look at it, maybe they won't, right? And the majority of my students might not. Now, I understand that's a problematic view from my from my perspective, or from any other teacher's perspective. So don't get me wrong in saying like, oh, I'm not going to do this, or I don't want to do this. I'm just saying, like, when I first started kind of learning about accessibility and trying to understand it, those were some of my objections or some of my issues, and same things that I've heard from other people where they're like how much work do we have to do for potentially zero purpose if we don't have that student, right? I don't know if you've ever had other people kind of bring these issues up for you, but that's one that has been a major barrier to getting accessibility to work across a lot of, online classes or digital resources for students, etc.
Yeah, well, I can only think back to that one student where my mind went to, oh yeah, of course we've got like this whole set of things we can do for you. And when I mentioned it to one of our administrators at the time, and again, I was brand new, so I was thinking I was going to get full support, and it was more like, well, no, don't mention it. We'll just enlarge the test for her, and if she asks again, then we can talk about it. But otherwise, it's a lot of paperwork. Mm-hmm. So at the time, I just thought like, wait a minute, but so I can see that the frustration, and I guess that's just one of the things that is worth mentioning.
Yeah.
As we are right now.
Well, I also think it's over the last few years especially, it's gotten so much easier to use tech to become accessible, right?
Yes.
So now it's getting to the point where it's kind of click button for a lot of things, and a lot of,
mm-hmm.
whether it be, and accessibility has so many different parts to it, right? Like there's vision, there's hearing, there's all sorts mm-hmm. of things. Even like the amount of screen contrast, between the letters and the background, like if you have a white, or
just the shape, the style of the font mm-hmm. in some cases.
Yeah. So there are now a lot of plugins and things that you can do just to kind of do a quick sweep and make sure that you're basically okay with everything. And then some of them, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, you can just click a button and it will automatically make the changes for you. So like if you're saying, hey, this font is not a good choice, it will just go and convert it to an accessible font or something like that as well. One other problem that I have with accessibility, though, Ixchell, is the word itself, accessibility, because sometimes you're just talking about being able to get access to something, right? Not mm-hmm. the whole like legal compliance side of things, mm-hmm. but you're just trying to say like, hey, is this accessible? Meaning, can I get into it, or can I use it somehow? And sometimes we end up having kind of confusing conversations with people, and we're like, oh, wait a second, we're using different meanings of this same word,
same term.
or like kind of semi-parallel-ish, but not the same thing, right? And so so that can also create some frustration and confusion. But I do think that overall, when we're talking about this, and this, when I get in, like as soon as the legal talk starts happening, my brain kind of shuts off. Like, I'm like, oh, okay, like let's just figure it out, right? But I do think it is something that does help everybody at the end of the day, right? So we're starting to recognize these things and saying, hey, that there are some ways to make these things work. And the last little issue that I sometimes have as a TESOL teacher, right, is there are some times when I don't want alt text, or I don't want, alternate, like descriptive text or anything like that on a picture, because I'm trying to get the students to describe that picture for themselves. And so I don't want them, like if they're right clicking on the picture, to go, oh, well, now I just know what it says. And, so if it's something like that, where it's like, hey, the picture is kind of the prompt and the goal is for you to make your own language around it. But if I'm providing the background language to that in there, then I'm not able to assess your ability to create, you know what I mean? So like, so there's a weird little, there are these weird little points inside of accessibility and TESOL that, like, I don't know how to describe them. They're not exceptions, but they're like, oh, okay, is there a solution to this particular way that I'm trying to approach it? And sometimes I find that tricky, or I don't always have the answer to it, or maybe the tech just doesn't exist to kind of do exactly what I'm trying to do. And so those can be parts of things that are good, bad, in between, tricky about
just need more development, as you said. I know. Need more development.
I know. It's all coming, and it's getting, like we said, it's getting better. We'll talk about quite a few of them as we move forward. Let's skip over and talk about some ways that we can actually ensure some accessibility. So, Ixchell, before we jump over there, it has been a while. We've mentioned this before. We haven't gotten any reviews in a while, but I did find this. I don't know if this is legit or not. We've had a couple of these before, but there's a blog post that came up. It was got a little indication: 15 best ESL teacher podcasts. And guess what number we are? Well, first, surprise, we made the list. Yay.
Well, we're not number one yet.
We're not number one.
Right?
We're
not number two, because that'd be hard to top.
So number 2 is Carol Salva, who we love and had on the show.
It's our friend and colleague.
Friend of the pod, all that stuff. So she is number 2.
And we are...
Dun, 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 dun. Logically speaking, we're number 3. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm excited.
That is pretty cool.
That's nice that, like, if someone comes across this. But one of the things about these types of posts is I'm never sure if they're just like scraped and automated from something, and like how are they choosing those numbers? It might be based on like Facebook likes. It kind of seems like, possibly, I'm not sure, or different things. But it's still kind of nice to be up there on that list, and it does seem like it's somewhat customized language around what we're doing. So
and at least if you do stumble upon that, you're going to get 15 relevant podcast suggestions. So.
And I saw there's actually a lot on there. A couple of these that I haven't heard. As we've mentioned before, sometimes podcasts fade away over time, and that does happen. We've been pretty consistent, but it's nice to see a couple of other choices on there. And I haven't even heard this number 1, which is called Let's Talk Tesol, out of Canada.
Neither have I. So
yeah,
something to check out.
But it is Jackie Bolin, whose name I do know. She does a lot of, you'll find a lot of her books on Amazon and stuff. So I'm actually going to download that and check it out.
Cool. All right. So considerations from guidelines for accessibility for English language learners. That's the article that you found, right, Brent?
Yeah. It's a little bit older article, but it was, when I was reading it, I was like, oh, I think it's 10 years old. It's from 2012, but.
Oh, this is the same article I found.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You and I both found the same.
Yeah. We both thought the same. It's like a little older, but still relevant.
Yeah. It's super good. It's not really any independent tech related. And so, and I will also point out that I think that some of the language around this accessibility is doing that same thing we were talking about, is like conflating like technically legal accessibility versus making things easy to access for students, right? And so I think it's kind of blending both of these things, but that's still fine. Like, it's still the conversation that we want to have and make sure that our students are able to understand directions that we give to them, information, all of those types of things. So I think we should kind of go through this list. And the other cool thing I liked about this list and this collection is that they did all the work that we normally do, like finding 20 different resources and putting them all together and then summarizing them. So now we can just review this here. And it is all based on pulled research. So we'll have the link to this, and then you can go and find all of the individual articles and journal entries.
Research, yeah. All right. So one of the points that they touched on is when designing test instructions, they should be designed so that they maximize clarity and also minimize the potential for confusion. And that's very important because oftentimes I've seen, and again, this is not my experience. So teachers design tests and they want to make sure they cover everything so that a student doesn't get confused. But then at the end, when they ask me to proofread it or take a look, the part for instructions is so lengthy. And it's like, wait a minute, all you needed to say was this and that,
right,
two verbs.
Yeah, I know. So it's like overcomplicated.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly guilty of this because it's like,
me too.
I want to ensure that you definitely know. And then it's like,
Yes.
here's a 10-page instruction paper on how to write a one paragraph. And it's like, maybe.
And then with like a footnote at the bottom when you have like an unknown word.
Yeah. And you're putting in all your glossary terms of like everything in there. You're like,
Yeah, like Scantron.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're all guilty of this one. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, our best intentions are totally positive, right? Like, we're trying to help students out. We're trying to make sure that they understand what's going on, but we're actually doing them a disservice through this. So
yeah,
we always want to be careful about intentions versus actual outcomes, right? Like those can be quite different.
Yeah, you know what I've now sort of I notice I tend to be doing now. I bold the key verbs in whatever directions I'm giving, so that if somebody's just skimming, they at least are going to pause at the key verb.
Yeah. And
so hopefully that'll help.
You can also do, and I think we'll cover some of these in the other parts, but like, if you're being really proactive, so if you're using, for example, an LMS like Canvas, you can actually, maybe this is getting too much into it, but if you have a service like Design Plus where you can do all these cool like HTML tricks, you could actually have a word that you would hover over inside of Canvas, or a student would hover over, and then it would pop up and give them a dictionary, like a definition that you provide for them as well. But I think part of the argument
might slow them down.
Right. Yeah. So part of the argument here is like, well, then just write it in a way that they don't need to have that dictionary definition instead, which is going to tie into point 2. It's use vocabulary in test items that is widely accessible to all students, and avoid unfamiliar vocabulary that is not directly related to the construct. And so, you know, a lot of times, especially like in my classes, we're doing, you know, academic English. And so a lot of the times I'm like, oh, well, then they should be practicing more academic language and I should be presenting this in a more academic way. And it's like, okay, so then I intensify the vocabulary. Is me putting 2 or 3 harder vocabulary words in there ultimately going to change the quality of the writing response that they give to me? You know, like, I mean, there's definitely arguments for learning new vocabulary, but then maybe I should be spending that time directly on vocabulary teaching in class instead of trying to sneak it into a writing prompt or something.
Yeah, and maybe the writing prompt may not be the place to introduce brand new difficult vocabulary if you're looking to, in their writing, reflect what they've already internalized as what they've taken in from the lessons, right? So I think it's carefully making decisions, conscious decisions of where we're going, what the purpose for that new vocabulary is, right? Especially if that's going to give us a product that we're going to use for assessment.
Yeah.
So kind of along the same line, avoiding the use of syntax or vocabulary that is above the test's target grade level. The test item should be written at a vocabulary level no higher than the target grade level, and preferably at a slightly lower grade level, to ensure that all students understand the task presented. And so here I'm going to give an example, a recent example. We are developing a introductory video with the script of the do's and don'ts, and welcome to our school, et cetera, et cetera. And the first version of the script that I saw was obviously not written by someone who was keeping in mind all of the what a brand new student from another country who's never set foot here, and this might be the first introduction to English, not keeping in mind that all of this is brand new information in addition to a brand new setting, being away from family, et cetera. And so my first response was, whoa, I would not understand what any of these words are as a brand new emerging speaker of English. So we had to go back and revamp it, because the purpose of that instructional video is for them to understand and be welcome. So if they're hearing immediately all these rules and guidelines, and they may not, it will just be words to them. So that we had to go back and revisit the purpose. So using syntax and vocabulary, simplified it, and then made it a very conversational piece that was easily to be understood by even the most emergent of our learners.
Yeah. Well, I know what teachers listening right now are screaming if they're driving to work as they're listening to this. They're going, Vygotsky, ZPD, we have to push them. We got to give them the I+1, right? Like all the, pushing our language acquisition, the whole concept of, pushing beyond our comfort level, just going one level beyond where they're at, and like all of these theories, which are great, and they drive a lot of my pedagogy and my teaching. But I think what they're trying to get to here is like, actually, I think inside of this article, if I remember correctly, they kind of mentioned, hey, none of these are meant to be taken alone or as a like a gold standard. Absolutely. You kind of have to make adjustments to it. So if you're doing, like you're saying, if you're doing like an introduction to something where you're trying to bring people in,
you got to think about the purpose.
Yeah, or if you're doing an assessment, right? Like you don't need to be teaching them in those times. You need to be assessing them, right? And so, so you don't need to always be pushing those that extreme language. And I know when people are like, "You never go a level below where they're at," and it's like, well, you do. And
if you're doing it, and if you're doing a diagnostic versus a final assessment or a cumulative assessment, which I have thoughts about, but depending on what you're doing, if it's an instructional video to help them figure out how to access the lab material, or the homework at home, or digital material, etc., it boils down to me on the purpose and the tasks that they should be able to accomplish. Those instructions.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I'm going to teach you how to use Google Docs, and I'm going to make it challenging for you to figure out what I'm saying. It's like, not a good idea. You guys. Like,
so if Mastodon people out there are listening, you'll want to take some of this into consideration for us.
So this is behind the scenes, everybody. Ixchell and I are like testing out Mastodon because of all the craziness on Twitter right now, and Mastodon is
not easy to transfer over.
It could be cool. It has potential, but but like there's a learning curve for sure. All right, so back to topic. I digress. What does digress mean? Let me explain it to you in a long, complicated. All right. So next one up is keep sentence structures as simple as is possible while expressing the intended meaning. In general, ELLs will find a series of simpler, shorter sentences to be more accessible than longer, more complex sentences. Can you say this in an easier way? Are all of the details that are going into your sentences really necessary, I guess? And I don't know if you read this part down below at the bottom of that article, Ixchell, where they actually kind of gave some examples of these. But I'll just read one, right, as kind of one that they set up for children, right? Like a fifth grade mathematics, the original version, right? And it was a word problem. It said, Charisse scored the following numbers in points of five. Sorry, numbers of points in 5 dart games. So Charisse scored the following numbers in points of 5. why can't I get my language out? Cherise
Yes, it's
scored
not
the following
accessible.
numbers of points in 5 dart games. See, look how hard it is for even me to say it. Then it gives the numbers 88, 96, 112, 135, 144. What is the median of these numbers? So this is like a test question, right? And then they're saying, well, here, do this as a modified version. Look at the 5 numbers below, 88, 96, whatever. What is the median of these numbers? And it's like, oh, yeah, I don't need to set it up with like this context of like a dart game. And again, I do think that a question like that would be intending to engage students. It's like students might like darts or something like that. Like, where am I going to apply this, right? Like so there is kind of a sense where you can see where a teacher might like to do this because they're trying to make it, applicable or interesting to them somehow, but it throws you off. Like I couldn't even say the sentence 3 times in trying to read it, right? And the goal is not, in this case, like it is a math question, right? And so if you're a math teacher out there, are you trying to trip students up over the different possibilities of understanding following numbers of points in 5 dart games, like whatever that means, So,
and if you're a language learner, the word dart, that might be a difficult word for you.
Yeah, well, and also following too, right? Because you're like the word following it still trips up some of my advanced students because they're like, does that mean the things that were before it or the things that were coming behind it? And which one goes first and second, right? Yeah. So yeah, we want our students to learn those things. But again, if it's an assessment time or like, are we teaching, is that the goal of the teaching, or is the goal of the teaching in this case to get those numbers averaged out, right? And that's what we're trying to have a conversation around or trying to help our students get through.
So along those same lines, words that might also trip up our students are cognates, particularly false cognates. Some people call them false friends, and these are words that may appear to have the same meaning or two or more. And
we're all tripping up over our words.
We are. So these are phrases that appear to have the same meaning in 2 or more languages, but they actually do not. And there's plenty of examples in many languages. Brent, have you come upon any?
I mean, I think that there's like, well, so you're talking about false ones that are not actually.
Yeah, either one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back to my own my own language learning. I think you're putting me on the spot here. The one that I always kind of think of is in Japanese, the word to, and like the gate or the door, right? And then and the word door, and like, oh, does that come from the same source? And it's no relation really, right? But like in my head, I was able to. But then you can also make mistakes with those things, and I think these are a lot more common for us in, like the Romance or the Germanics or Latin-based, whatever language is, right? I'm sure that there are a lot of them where you see the word. Like if you're a French speaker or a Spanish speaker, and then you're bringing that idea over into English. Oh, here's a really common one. Maybe it's not quite right, but one that I'm seeing a lot with my Spanish speaking students right now, and always anyone who has Spanish speaking students, is the S versus the it is, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Being able, like, because a lot of my students just write is in sentences, and I'm like, okay, like let and to me, I'm like, I've explained this so many times, but for them, like, they're not thinking of that, right? And so
it sounds, their brain is going to the most comfortable memory accessible, which is. Oh, it makes sense. Sounds complete to the Spanish speaking brain, right? Yeah.
So and then I think another couple of the ones that came in the article was like deception, I think, like deception, which like I think in Spanish, what does that mean? That's
deception is disappointment,
like a disappointment, right? And so we would definitely see,
but not like a lie, not like deceptive.
Right.
It's just,
so things like that, right? And it's like, you're by no fault of your own are you trying to do anything, of course, right? And students are trying to trick themselves into things, but you can see where these cognates might be like confusing and create problems. So again, as we're paying attention, as we're writing, like, and then as we hear from our students, we make adjustments. We're like, oh, that's how you misunderstood it. Okay, let me make a change to it the next time around so that I can make it a little bit better overall for you.
And really what it does for the teacher or the person doing this is you just get better at personalizing things. It gives you a broader way of writing things, which brings me to the next point. Do not use cultural references or idiomatic expressions that are not equally familiar to all students. And the example they gave here is being on the ball. And I have a thing about this, Brent.
Okay.
And I know. So as a language learner and later someone who loved writing, I loved writing. I loved writing in English. And one of the things that was stressed throughout my writing instruction was to be clear. And being clear meant not using figures of speech or idiomatic expressions. So I took great care throughout my college years to write clearly. And then me going into the classroom as an English teacher. And here I was expected to teach idioms when I was like, wait a minute, but this makes it so difficult to understand. And I had all these teachers, some of my colleagues, native English speakers, speaking to their students in idioms, unintentionally sometimes, but natural for them. And I was thinking, well, all you need to tell them is this and this and that, and he'll understand. I see exactly why he didn't understand you. And again, every once in a while, I get students who are hung up on, I've got to be able to learn as many idioms as possible because that's going to make me a better native-like speaker. And my thing is, no, that's going to make you sound crazy. In fact, that's going to make you seem like you're from a different generation because I don't know.
No, it's very
idioms
real.
are confusing. And I find it interesting that my sister, she's younger. She speaks in idiomatic language more often than I do. And I catch it every time. I'm thinking, how'd you learn all these idioms? Why are you using that? And then she struggles to get herself out of the idiom into just the clear English.
Yeah.
I guess. And it's different. And I just think, oh, what you're trying to say is this. And I've told her many times, how'd you learn all this language? And again, we go back and forth on it, but it is confusing. And it can, if it's taken literal, like a student was asked to bring a dish to a potluck. Well, I'm sure after he figured out what potluck was. Yeah, but he brought an empty plate. He had no idea. Yeah, he brought an empty plate.
Really?
He did. And that was his story of how embarrassing it was for him. And again, nobody explained to him a meal from your country. And also he probably, he must have thought it's a game. I mean, potluck, the thing itself, the name of it doesn't make sense. And if you're trying to translate it, you're going to think pot and luck, lucky pot. Oh, it must be like we're sharing something, a game. I don't know. But think of how that never thought about it before.
So did you? I don't think you've told me that story before. That's so funny. Yeah.
How about being on the ball? What was that?
Yeah. Well, you weren't on the ball when you were trying to teach the new
of course I wasn't on the ball.
I had a student once. So this was wild. When I had moved back to Japan after I got my after I graduated and everything, I moved back to Japan, and I actually totally by chance, like I was teaching in elementary school and playing with the kids out in recess or something like that, and a friend of mine, a Japanese friend that I had met in San Diego, drove by and saw me and like pulled over his car.
So
We're talking anyone who knows the geography of Japan. This is in Gunma, which is like straight up middle of nowhere. It's like being in the middle of Kansas, right? And then like he somehow saw me, and then I was just going in as like inside as he saw me. So he's like, and like you can't just like walk onto an elementary school campus, but he passed a note to a teacher to give to me. And then my friend, great guy, really liked studying idioms, and then he wrote a note to me that said, "Brent, I am tickled pink that I saw you, and now I am over the moon. Let's catch up." And I'm like,
please don't be tickled pink.
Yeah, tickled pink. And I'm like, I love this guy. He's still awesome. And I'm like, okay, like we need to talk a little bit about overusing idiomatic expressions. But it's kind of the same thing, right? And we have idioms classes at our school right now, and they're very popular because they do lend insight into things, but also
absolutely.
But
it's
also
like decoding.
Right.
It is decoding a
culture.
code.
Yeah. So again, same thing. It's like, okay, where are we using this language? Are we being intentional with it? I had another colleague that used to just use idioms, like you were saying, all over the place when he was giving presentations to students and things like that. And all the students are just like, I don't know anything you're saying. And like, it was like, okay, yeah, let's make some adjustments to the language here. But yeah. So these can be a few ones. Got a couple more. So what's next?
Yeah, other things that can be equally confusing or more confusing is the use of sentence structures that are difficult to follow. So the passive voice or sentences with multiple clauses, those can definitely, I've had, multiple instances of students asking me, but there is no subject. How do you know? And it's like, oh my gosh, but sometimes it's implied. And it would just be easier to flip it to be an active sentence. And I understand if it has to be a legal, it's legal writing or it's business writing and you're deflecting, who's ordering whatever it is they're ordering.
Sure.
But when it comes to testing materials or giving instructions or something that will automatically add a barrier to the access of that information for the student, then you're not helping them.
Yeah. By the time you pass this test, you will have understood how developing. You're like, wait, what? You're using like everything that you could possibly mix in there.
Yeah. It's customary that as one finish. Like that's not necessary. That's also not appropriate because that type of writing is appropriate in particular cases. Yeah. Maybe not instructions.
So next was don't use syntax that might be confusing or ambiguous, such as using negation or double negatives in constructing test items, right? So there's a lot of that one, like which one is the wrong choice, right? Which one doesn't belong or something, which, again, if you're more advanced, it might work, right? But it's like, are we trying to... And if that's part of the language, same thing, right? Like if that's the language you're testing, then okay, let's play around with it. But like, double negatives and all of these types of things. And it's like, well, what is the question itself asking me? Like again, are we designing the questions where the questions are the actual assessment or is it the concepts behind it, right? And so I think what ends up happening is it sounds obvious to say, yes, the question that I'm developing is a question that I want them to understand. But a lot of times it's really not about the way the question is formed. It's about understanding the content of the answer, right? And so then you're playing with different ways that students can understand it, make mistakes, right? All sorts of possibilities inside of there. And so you want to be thoughtful and not, you can develop challenging questions, but you want to make sure you know why you're phrasing it in the way you are as well.
And it's probably, as we're getting to the last of the points listed in that article here, it's probably worth mentioning that for those teachers who spend a lot of time developing test questions and test materials, or just groups of test developers, to revise and revamp every 2 years or so if you're using a bank, because different people come in and put in, you see the different style of questions, and also some things just become outdated. I sometimes see test questions that my students are getting from a test bank that is created, and I think I wouldn't know how to answer that question because the way it's written is weird. So it tells me it may not accurately tell me what my student can or can't do. So minimizing the use of low frequency, long or morphologically complex words and long sentences is something that we should also take into account. I can't think of a particular one right now because I'm so aware of what I'm writing when I'm writing it that I try to simplify all the time. It's when I struggle with writing, now that I don't have to read and write research anymore. Now I struggle with putting it into that
framework
language that's so inaccessible to many and so hard to translate almost, right? So
yeah, it can definitely be like a set of challenges even for us, right? As like
absolutely,
as we're building these things. And so if it's hard for us, again, you want to make sure you're like, well, if it's hard for me and I can't figure out what I'm saying, then my students definitely can't, right?
I guess an example of all of these is when if any of you have ever attended the Drinks with Diesel and played my Stump the Teacher trivia, I use every possible way to trip anybody up on 8 questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to pull together another Drinks with Diesel one of these days.
Yeah.
But and you're gonna have to make the problem is you're gonna have to spend 8 hours building these insanely complicated questions
That no one can pass anyway. And everyone feels so bad after taking it. The number one comment I get is, "Ixchell, this is so hard. I feel so dumb." It's like, no, it's not you.
That was my goal.
It's
I wanted to make you feel like a dummy.
It's the way the questions are made. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
So again.
Cool. So I thought, Ixchell, that we might jump through a couple of tools as well. Just again, we're kind of talking different parts of accessibility, like how well students can understand it, but also like, also the technology and the legal requirements. So for example, there is, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but essentially, if you're working for any kind of government type of teaching, so whether that be public schools or whatever else it is, then you're going to have some 508 compliance issues. And again, I know as soon as we start saying like code numbers and assembly bills and whatever, I'm like, my brain started going.
But if you haven't heard of 508, you probably should be aware of it.
Yeah. So 508, like you need to be 508 compliant, which is 508 is the law that allows for the accessibility under the definition that we had mentioned at the beginning, and that requires it, not allows for it. I should make sure that I'm using the right words as well. But the if you want to make sure that you're being compliant, there's like software that you might want to buy, and you want to go and check with those companies that, hey, is what I'm buying actually 508 compliant? So let's say, for example, your school is looking at bringing in Pear Deck, for example, and these big ed tech companies are almost always compliant, right? They'll be able to provide you with the documentation, but like before you start pursuing these things, you want to make sure that, hey, like would it even be kosher for me to bring these things in, right? And so 508 compliance is one of those. And then we'll put a link in there as well, but there's a kind of a cool free ebook out there called Professional Web Accessibility Auditing Made Easy. Again, same thing. It's a title that just puts me to sleep almost immediately, but there is good content inside of it. I always feel bad when I'm like, oh, that's boring. But like when you start picking and choosing and diving into individual parts, then it's kind of cool, and there's a lot of fun stuff to play around with. So we'll have those available inside of the show notes. But then we want to talk about a few of the actual tools that you can use to make things more accessible. So I'm going to start with one, Ixchell.
Have you ever quite a lot.
Yeah,
quite a lot.
Yeah, we have
that are new for me.
Yeah, because we do a lot of this stuff. We talk more about accessibility on my other show on the Higher Edtech podcast, and so I'm because I'm also on the online education committee at our school. These are more common conversations for me. But one of the tools that we have, which I think is really cool, is Grackle. Have you seen this before?
I have not heard of Grackle.
So Grackle is a Google Docs plugin, and basically and I think slides and different things as well. But you just run it, and it will do an accessibility check on your document, and then it'll give you a little click through in order to make sure that it is like, hey, your font is not non-accessible font, right? Or your color contrast, you kind of have this light gray color going on here. There's not enough contrast between that and the background, right? And so it shows you all the potential problems in the document that you build, and then you can just click through, and you don't necessarily even have to go in and re-change it. It'll say like, here's a suggestion, and you just click on it and it will make that change for you. So that level of accessibility makes it a lot easier to make sure that you're being compliant and that you're doing the right and the legal things with your documents.
That is pretty cool. Is there a charge for it?
There is. It's not very expensive for your institution. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but you can go in and look at it. And I think there's a free version too, like if you're only doing it for yourself. But I think if you're doing it like at a bigger level, there might be, it's some of those freemium type of things, I think. I haven't looked at the pricing for a while because we just have access to it now.
So there's another one that's new for me,
Mm-hmm.
and you can talk a little bit more about it. It's Pope Tech,
Yeah.
and it sounds like it's something that you run through your system to see what is not compatible.
Yeah.
Am I
Yes.
correct? And
Yeah. And we're looking at this one. There's different versions of this, but built into Canvas. So if you're a Canvas school, it's the same type of thing as Grackle, but instead of in Google Docs, you're clicking a button and you're seeing if your Canvas pages are accessible for people.
that is pretty cool. So it's LMS specific, so it'll run through your LMS. Is that what?
Correct. Yeah. It
That is
kind
so
of,
cool.
yeah, puts in, and Canvas has its own accessibility checker, which is pretty cool and does a lot of the work, but this one's a little bit more robust. It's a little bit more connected to the right things. And then you can also do a whole version where and most people here don't need to worry about it, but if you're in some sort of leadership position, you can also do an audit of your entire department or school, not seeing any individual person's bad design necessarily, but just saying, hey, overall, 70% of your pages are accessible and 30% need to be updated or whatever. And so that can give you good overall guidelines in terms of helping the rest of your faculty or your colleagues to, make those adjustments or understand what they need to make changes to.
Very cool. So the next one is something we've talked in a few of our episodes, or maybe if not our episodes, some of the workshops we've given, and that is Beeline Reader Chrome extension. And it's an extension that will colorize the text to eliminate or minimize screen fatigue and also improve focus as you're reading. And if people are familiar with different color overlays for students that need to focus when they're reading, this is something similar. So except that it colors the text and it colors it on a digital page. Yeah. So I believe there's a free version, and I think I'm sure that they now probably have something bigger than their regular. I think if you're looking to use it for an institution, there's probably a paid version.
Yeah.
But it's been around for a while, so that's what I'm expecting.
Probably. Read and Write is definitely one of those that does have different versions, the free ones. We've talked about Read and Write for sure, so I'm not going to spend a long time on it, but it's a great tool. As soon as I teach it to my students, they're like, I see them using it many semesters later in their own work, which is it drops down like an activity bar inside of your browser, and I think it's in Chrome. I don't know if it's in other ones, but basically it lets students highlight words. They can click on a button and it will read that out for them. It will let them. You can highlight different words and then click a button and it'll isolate them into its own new document and create it'll create a vocabulary list for you. You can click a button and it'll bring up a picture dictionary of the word you're looking at. So lots of different ways for students to recognize what's going on with the text that they're reading here. And so Read and Write is super powerful. Again, it does cost for students to use it, but and teachers always kind of struggle to find the free version for themselves, but there is a free version for an individual teacher, so you can all at least build parts of the things by yourself. And then if you want to get your students access to it, you might look at an institutional license.
Okay, so another tool that we've talked about, and I know my colleagues learned about it from you, Brent, is Moat. And I know you love Moat. I think, aren't you like an ambassador or something for them?
Yeah. I haven't seen any I still tell people I still paid for my last updated version, so I'm not sure if there's anything supposed to be special about being an ambassador, but I just love it. Yeah.
So Moat is voice notes, and you're able to leave feedback for the student can respond with feedback, but you've used it. I haven't used Moat because I haven't been doing a lot of teaching of writing. So
yeah, use it all the time. I mean, that's how I kind of try to make my feedback loops a little bit more human.
They're more efficient. It's more efficient, really.
Yeah.
Because a student will listen to it and might listen to it a few more times than actually read a comment that you write.
Yeah.
And then internalize the feedback.
Correct. And then by default, they're already considering accessibility, because if a student has hearing issues or can't understand what you're saying, it's also using AI to pretty well, not perfect, but do a pretty good job of transcribing what you're saying, so they can listen and read at the same time, and they can even click on a button to translate what the AI has said into their language. So if they're really struggling, and I have to talk with my students about that too, and say like, hey, make your choices for yourself. Like, are you really trying to learn something, or are you just trying to skip through and get this right? But it is cool that it's there, and it does give them some different options. So Moat is great, and I'm also going to tie that in with one more, Ixchell, which is called ScreenPal from Screencast-O-Matic. It's kind of the same thing, except it's a video version of Moat, and they're playing around. They're still building that. I think it's still maybe in beta, but it does kind of this same thing where it will put in right into your Google Docs or whatever. It'll put a video of you talking, or you can do screen sharing. Cool. Yeah, like all these other little options there for students to kind of go, oh, okay, these actually.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. That's excellent.
Yeah, so
I had not heard of ScreenPal.
Yeah, it's new-ish. I think it kind of launched over the summer, or maybe a little bit, and they're still kind of talking it through and figuring out how it's going to work. But it is an upcoming option for a lot of people. So that's a lot about accessibility. Let's work on working our way over and out.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And this time I have something that takes me back to Japan. I miss Japan. It's been officially a year since I left. Yeah.
Happy return
to a land of chaos. Yeah. Anyway, what takes me back to Japan is John's Blend in White Musk. John's Blend is a popular for some reason they're made in New York, but
I don't Japan.
I don't see it sold here. But they're popular for their room sprays, their all sorts of laundry detergent, like scent type things, car deodorizers, a lot of scent type things. And if you've ever been to Japan, a lot of the stores have different types of white musk, but white musk takes me, it's like this crisp sort of linen smell. Oh, it's so good. But yeah, you can find it on Amazon, like all things, and it's about $12. It smells so good.
Nice. All right, cool. Mine is a song. So recently, I think you might have been a little surprised on Twitter when I told you that I was at the Harry Styles concert recently.
Yes.
So I went to Iron Maiden a month or so ago, and now I was at Harry Styles.
I love that your music ranges from one end to the other.
Oh, Harry Styles is amazing. But here, so we'll talk about that some other time. So opening act was Ben Harper, and Ben Harper's been around for a long time too, and people, whatever. I've never really got into him or followed his music, but he was fine. He was good. But the best part was that he pulled his kids up on stage and they did a song, which is his son and his daughter with Laura Dern, the actress. And they did this song called The Longest Apocalypse. And it was just like, oh my, it was such a good song. And so then I was searching all over trying to find this song because they're like, oh, this song. Yeah. And we did find it. I think there's something weird with the upload because it seems to cut off kind of like at a weird place. And I'm like, that's not the end. That can't be the end of the song, right? Like it almost feels like sometimes on an album, like when a song cuts off and like it jumps right into the next song. But it's like, if you only listen to that one song track by itself, it sounds weird. So it's kind of got one of those things going on. But the 2 minutes and 20 seconds that do exist of it still is just this beautiful, moody, kind of brooding song. And was really just outstanding. So I did find it. We'll put the link in the show notes. It's called Longest Apocalypse. And the group, I guess the two of them, or maybe just the daughter's name, but it was produced by the son, I'm not sure, but it's called Harris. And so really outstanding song, and happy that I heard it live. And then even though it's an imperfect recording, I hope that gets updated as well. So
very cool.
Yeah, lots of fun.
As always, you could win a one-of-a-kind DIESOL pin by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're giving us a shout out any other way, tag us on social media.
We do have a Patreon if you want to support us that way. And of course, you can find show notes and other episodes at diesel.org/73. And you can listen to us at VoiceEd Canada. We are also on Twitter for now. We'll see how things go. The show is at DieselPod. I am at Brent G. Warner.
And I'm Ixchell at Ixie_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. In Thai, thank you is Kop Kun Ka. Kop Kun Ka for tuning in to the Diesel podcast.
Kop Kun Ka, everybody. Oh, wait, I can't say that as a man.
Kop Kun Krap.
Kop Kun Crap. Yeah, sorry, we got to get our... Bye!
Bye!